Hi everyone, welcome to Outgrow's Marketer of the Month. I'm your host Dr. Saksham Sharda. I'm the creative director at outgrow.co. And for this month, we're going to interview Neal Schaffer, who is the author of The Age of Influence and the host of the Maximize Your Social Influence podcast. Thanks for joining us, Neal.
Hey, Dr. Sharda, it's an absolute honor to be here.
Brilliant. So we're going to start with a rapid fire round just to break the ice. You get 3 passes. In case you don't want to answer the question, you can just say pass. But try to keep your answers to one word or one sentence only, okay?
I'll try my best.
All right. So the first one is, how long does it take you to get ready in the mornings?
15 minutes.
Okay. Most embarrassing moment of your life.
Pass.
How many hours of sleep can you survive on?
6.
Fill in the blank. An upcoming marketing trend is blank.
Meme marketing.
The city in which the best kiss of your life happened.
I'm sorry, the city in which the best case of my life?
Yes, kiss.
Oh, the best kiss of my life.
Yeah.
Kobe, Japan.
Okay. Pick one, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey.
Jack Dorsey.
The first movie that comes to your mind when I say the word ambition.
Pass.
When did you last cry and why?
Pass.
The biggest mistake of your career.
Not launching earlier.
How do you relax?
Listen to music.
How many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
6.
A habit of yours that you really hate.
Games.
The most valuable skill you've learned in life.
How to build relationships with people.
And finally, your favorite Netflix show.
Oh, well, it's actually Amazon Prime, but I'm going to say Vikings. Hopefully that counts.
Okay, fair. So, well, that's the end of the rapid fire round. You used up all 3 of your passes, so we're going to give you a 7 on 10, but it's okay. It's a 10 on 10, really. But okay, so now let's go on to the bigger questions. The first one is, and you can obviously take as much time as you want to respond to these, okay? What was one of the most surprising things you learned while writing your book, The Age of Influence? How has your journey as an author been like?
Well, I began writing the book, and the book is about influencer marketing. And I'm not part of the influencer marketing industry. I consider myself a digital social media marketer, but not necessarily an influencer marketing specialist. But as I was doing research and doing interviews and writing the book, I realized that, first of all, I think that marketers have really been miseducated on what influencer marketing is. And what really surprised me is that a lot of the elements of influencer marketing, most marketers have already been doing for some time without calling it that. And furthermore, I think as I continue to write and we continue to see these, drops in organic engagement across social media because of the way that algorithms work, that, influencer marketing really is one of, other than pay to play, it is one of the unique ways in which brands can really, somewhat organically, it is a form of paid media, but somewhat organically incite word of mouth that really there's no other way that I can think of that they can do that without collaborating with others. So there were a few different things that as I was writing it, I discovered. It sort of surprised me, but at the end of it, it all sort of made sense that, I come back to the point that social media was made for people, not for businesses. And therefore, although businesses had a free ride for some time, I think we need to get back to our roots and really leverage social to develop relationships with people. And from that, derive a heck of a lot of value in a lot of different ways.
And so do you think there's been a shift from a business kind of, having a business account to having personalities? So like CEOs of companies or CMOs, they've built a personality cult around themselves. Is that something we're going to move towards?
Well, definitely when, the way I define influencer marketing is really leveraging other social media users that have influence, right?
Hmm.
And I like to begin with not people that you don't know, but begin with people that you do know. And when we think of it that way, who are the people that know your business the best? They're your employees. And when we think about who should be your employee influencers, if you're a B2B organization, obviously the salespeople can monetize their influence in the forms of increased commissions. But really, the biggest influencer for a company normally should be their leader. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see more companies really realizing that and having their leader become more of a persona, more of a quote unquote influencer for their company. I think it's just a natural extension of everything we're seeing.
And what do you think is the risk associated with that? Because, when someone puts their personal profile out there as an advocate for a company, if they get canceled or if, they say something that they shouldn't have said, how does one handle that?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of common sense that goes into this. Most companies, if they want to go that route, we call this employee advocacy. I call it more like employee influencer, but it really comes down to training, understanding just the common sense ways of using social media that, there's certain things you wouldn't say in social media and really just going from there. I think at the end of the day you sort of have to trust people, and I think that even if you work with an influencer, even if you have an employee that's not part of a program, there's always risk that they're going to do something or say something, and that is something that I think we live with. And I think that the benefits far outweigh whatever risks there might be. That being said, I look at Tesla, I look at Elon Musk. He said a lot of really questionable things
Mm.
during this pandemic. Has Tesla stock taken a hit? No. Has Elon Musk made some, does he have fewer fans? Maybe. But I don't really think that that's hurt Tesla as much as you might think it could have hurt them. So, at the end of the day, people gravitate towards authentic experiences in social media, authentic people. And I think that's really the most important thing. And, being authentic means you sometimes, I mean, you're going to speak your mind, and it's going to attract people. It's going to repel people. I think there are ways of creating those boundaries, like I said, in training that, hey, there's certain things we don't talk about. There's certain things that we should talk about. That would be the role of, I don't know, public relations, corporate communications, and they should be part of this program, right? I don't think that, we don't want rogue people saying bad things about our brand. But I also think that we're way beyond that. People have their own personal brands. People understand that everybody's looking at them, that even if they want to change jobs, their future employers are looking at them. So I think, we've all matured in that way. And I don't think it's the same as it might have been maybe a decade ago when social media was still new to all of us.
What exactly is the role of fractional CMO? Like, how do you help businesses grow with their marketing?
Yeah, so I launched my business as a consultancy, and I had a particular client that said, love to implement everything you said, and we don't have the resources. Would you work with us on an agency business model? So I did that, right? So I've seen both the consultant and the agency, and then I had a particular client that was based locally here in Orange County, California, that said, we want your help, but it's less about this black box, agency project or black box consultant project. We want to have your ongoing help to help change our culture, to help train our employees, to help us create a strategy over the long term, and to really work together with us. And it was as if I was being hired as a CMO. I was pretty much reporting to the CEO, but I was often working with more junior people to really, help them craft their whole marketing strategy and really their whole marketing department. And I realized then that it's this sort of unique role that since the pandemic, I've seen a lot of businesses have a need for when they don't have, especially when it comes to digital marketing or social media marketing or influencer marketing, when they don't have that talent in house, they don't want to work with a consultant because it's not like a one time, very well defined project. Yet they don't want to just completely outsource it to an agency. They want to somehow foster it in house over time and really build up their own IP vis-a-vis digital and social media marketing. So those are companies I work with where it's really time based, right? When you hire an employee, it's sort of time based. It should be time based. So it is based on the fact that, hey, we have a contract and it's X number of hours per week. However, within those hours, they can be used any way you want. Whether you want me, virtually working together with your employees, you want me to do agency type work, you want me to do, consultant type work, you want me to just do work on my own, analyzing things or creating content, it's all within that realm. So it's a very, very flexible arrangement. And the reason it's called fractional is because I do this for many companies at once. And that's how companies don't have to make a full-time investment, and they're in control in terms of how many hours, a week or per month they want to hire me for. But it gives me the ability to work with several companies at once, and that benefits everybody. It benefits, what I learn at other companies obviously benefits every other company that I work with. And I really enjoy the variety and being able to help as many companies as possible. So that is I think traditionally you would think of fractional CMO as the CMO would really be only this sort of, executive marketing leader. And oftentimes that is the case. And that's the way I price my services. But depending on the business, they may not have that big of a team. They may be more of a startup where they really want me to get my hands, roll up my sleeves and really work together with their marketing team. And I'm more than happy to do that as well. So that's the way that I define it and sort of the way that my services work. And I think with the pandemic, it's very natural with more people working from home. It's really an opportunity for businesses to tap into talent globally, find those unique people that can fill a gap or that can help train their team or lead their team on that basis.
So could you give us some examples of companies that you've worked with simultaneously?
Yeah, well, I work with about a half dozen companies as is right now, as we speak. So anywhere from huge Japanese IT enterprise to a hair color company who mainly sells retail, a B2C company, to a B2B startup in quantum computing, to one of the biggest real estate networks here in the United States, to an educational training company in Dubai. And I'm trying to think who else is on my roster right now. Oh, an Israeli startup, a marketing agency startup. So it's as well as like a legal company that's trying to basically compete with like a LegalZoom, offer different sorts of services online without you having to hire a lawyer. So I've been doing this for more than a decade, so I've acquired a lot of experience working with a lot of different companies. And I think that's really my bread and butter, is this really holistic approach and finding the best solution for every client's needs. And therefore, that's sort of how it works, right? That's why I'm able to work with such a large variety of companies, but every company has different needs. And I really enjoy, getting to know each company a little bit deeper and finding that unique way in which I can help them. So hopefully that gives you a better idea. I know it sounds a little bit crazy. There is this quality control. The quality control for me is hours per week. So
Hmm.
I have certain, and contract terms, obviously, of months or what have you, but it's really limiting myself to X hours a week, in which case I can maintain and really deliver on what I promised to deliver. So, and therefore I price myself with saying, hey, if I'm working, 3 days a week on fractional CMO clients, that should be enough to live very, very comfortably. And that's sort of the situation I'm at right now.
So who's been your longest client and your shortest client? And by which I mean, you actually finished the work that was required for them in a short amount of time, so that really you eliminated your own job. Because I guess that's
Yeah,
the approach you're
that
going
is the
towards,
that
right? Yeah.
that exactly is the approach. Well, my minimum contract is 3 months, and I'll have startups come out to me and say, we don't have a big budget. We just want to start working with you for 3 months. And I've been able to provide, extreme value for those 3 months, where it's like, okay, we don't have any more questions. We know what we need to do, and maybe in the future we'll reach back out to you. So that's been the shortest. And like I said, if you're successful, then that's what happens. And there's no ego or anything involved. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to have served them for those 3 months to get them, to help them cross the chasm, right? I have other clients who I've worked with for years. I think we're on 3 or 4 years right now, that really keep me along as a part-time, CMO, part-time marketing director, because the market's always changing, and audiences are changing, digital platforms are changing, and they realize that, and they don't want to hire someone full-time. They feel really comfortable with our arrangement. They see the ROI, and they want to keep me going. So, and then we have everything in between.
Interesting. And do you think this is, I don't know, I'm like, it is consultancy, but is it also a symptom of the gig economy? Like everything is becoming a part of the gig economy. So you do gigs for them, and eventually you eliminate your own job.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, I think that with the work that I do, no one is going to hire me unless there's some sort of trust. There's some sort of
Hmm.
like, no, and trust, right? And, when I think of the gig economy, I think of Fiverr. I think of, relatively, although some of the jobs are pretty high value, we generally think of them as being low value. I think it's less of the gig economy and more of there are a lot of people who, I'm an ex corporate. I worked in corporate for a long time, and then I was able to work my own way as a consultant. So there are a lot more people that want a lot more flexibility. They have tremendous experience and tremendous know-how, but they just want a lot more flexibility in terms of how they live, how they spend their time. And to them, lifestyle choice is very, very important. So, and I think that number, I think with every recession, it grows. So I'm a baby
Mm.
of the 2008 recession. That was when I had my last corporate job. And that started me, November 2008 was really what started me on this whole journey. And I think there are others that also 2008 was when they started. And perhaps with the pandemic, we'll see 2020 as a time when others start. So I think that, there are a lot more people out there doing this. And I think the whole work from home, um, you know, the fact that you can try to hire someone, but at the end of the day, what I found is when I go to hire people and I hire people for projects or for specific things, it's really hard with digital and with social to find someone that does everything. They have their strengths, they have their weaknesses. And therefore, I find approach that works much better is to find people with unique skill sets that can do one thing and they do it really well. Right. So I wouldn't hire, and once again, if you're like at the enterprise level and you have a whole team of marketers is one thing, but I don't think you're going to hire someone that's both going to do your strategy and do your copywriting and do your SEO and do your video editing. It's really hard to find someone that does all of that. So I think, maybe this is also product when I think of marketing is that it's become a lot more complex. It moves very fast. There are a lot of executives who probably still don't really understand how TikTok works, for instance, because it's just come really, really quickly. And I think that's really, the challenge that a lot of companies have. They can wait for this digital transformation to somehow happen, or they can accelerate it either by finding someone full time. And I think another thing that's happening here is right before the pandemic, at least in the United States, our unemployment rate was really, really low. And I think it's, finding the right digital marketing talent is also harder for companies. There's less out there. And I think when you get to, you might have a lot of people, younger people that are really experienced. I think when you get to older generations, maybe they're less experienced because they're more experienced with traditional marketing. So I think there are a lot of factors at play here. I suppose the gig economy is part of it, but I think, consultants is something that we've had for a while. I think
Mm.
just creating that sort of flexible business model like I created was a natural extension of me wanting to work with a lot of different companies, me wanting to be flexible to serve companies where they're at instead of imposing a business model which didn't often meet their needs.
And in addition to all of this, you also host a podcast. So, how do you, or how can one strategize podcasts to expand their reach to a more qualified audience nowadays, do you think?
Yeah, so it's funny because I published The Age of Influence in March of 2020, and I had companies reaching out for me for influencer marketing. But because of this holistic approach, let's first look at everything you're doing vis-a-vis digital and social. And I found a lot of gaps, right? Like they didn't have a blog, they weren't doing SEO. They were spending a lot of money on pay-per-click advertising without really seeing good ROI, et cetera, et cetera. So that really got me started with what is going to be the subject of my next book, which I'm hoping becomes like this digital marketing playbook for this post-pandemic economy. But really, and I look at digital from a social media marketing perspective because that's where I started. And I begin to see social media content as being, having a very, very short shelf life. And then we look at content that has a long shelf life. Well, that comes down to blogging or blogs with Google, YouTube, videos with YouTube search engine, or podcasts, right? And all other forms of content that get very popular in social media, whether they be videos or stories or photos. The content doesn't last that long. It's a 24-hour shelf life. And I know that some networks, the content lasts a little bit longer than others, but it's still very short. Whereas when you have a blog, when you have a YouTube video, when you have a podcast, that lasts for years. I mean, I have a blog post from 2008 that still delivers traffic.
Mm.
So, when I work with clients, ideally you want to be found in Google, so you want to have a blog, and there's more to it than just that. But speaking simplistically, that is what you must have today. When we get outside of that blog, there is podcasting and there's video. So I began podcasting really as a content marketing initiative back in 2013, and it was off and on for a few years. And it wasn't until Q3 of 2019 when I became an active consumer of podcasts, and I realized I'd been doing them completely wrong. And it's really then where I became more active with my own podcast, really stuck with a weekly schedule since then. That's continued until today. And where I feel the podcast, there's different ways of using podcasts. So I launched a second podcast called The School of Influence. So there is a similar professor at universities. I teach at Rutgers Business School in New Jersey. She teaches at University of Texas, Austin. And she also wrote a book on influencer marketing called The Influencer Code. So we got to know each other and we got to collaborate. And she didn't have a blog. She didn't want to do a YouTube channel. I'm like, well, we should do a podcast because it's going to help you build a platform. And it has helped her build a platform. And it has, one of her objectives with the podcast was she wants to be able to interview the people that she might want to collaborate with or might want to work with. And podcasts are really funny because when you invite someone to a podcast, a lot of people, they want to be on a podcast. They want to be featured, right? And I don't know any other medium where that might be the case. In fact, I don't know any other medium where podcasting is the mainstream for podcasts is this interview format. There aren't a lot of blogs that are just interviews. There aren't a lot of YouTube shows that are just interviews, but I'd say more than half of podcasts, especially in the marketing realm, really are interview based. So for companies now that want to tap into, this Israeli client of mine, they're tapping into influencers by interviewing them in their podcast. That's top of the funnel for them, right? Reach out to them, develop a relationship with them, and maybe they'll become a contractor for them. Maybe they'll refer a client. Maybe they'll become a brand ambassador when they begin their referral program. But the podcast begins because now, and I wrote about this in the Age of Influence, when you have a podcast as a business, you begin to get a little bit more influence. It gets a little bit sexier because what does every podcaster want to do? They want to be on other podcasts because they know that is how they can best promote their own podcast, because the people listening to podcasts are obviously listening to other podcasts, right? If you hear stories, and I reached out to Seth Godin. He hasn't been on my podcast, but you hear others that reached out to him right when he was about to publish a new book, in which case he'd say, I'd love to be on your podcast. So when there are influencers that have new books, they have new programs they want to launch, they have a new initiative, they're working on a new company, have a new product, that's a great time where they really want to promote what they do. So I think for businesses, that's really the ROI for podcasts. But above and beyond that, just to get back to your original question, the podcast really helps build this intimate relationship. And it's sort of like, when you look at a competitor's feeds in social media, you might see the likes, and comments. You don't see the clicks. And podcasting is sort of similar. It's really hard to gauge sort of the ROI until you have a call to action, until you give them something special that says, hey, at the end of the episode, or maybe you have a dynamic, insertion of content. Hey, make sure you go here to get this. So I experienced this recently when I launched a membership community called Digital First. And I had a number of people, a good portion of people that ended up signing up for that came from my podcast. And I'd never talked to these people before. They were on my email list, but we never had a conversation in social. They never sort of, emailed me and, gave me feedback on my podcast, but they signed up for my membership. And that really, to me, validated that it's sort of this silent audience that's plugged into you, that with the right call to action, you can then sort of vet, well, what is that value? And any business listening, I would urge you to really consider the podcast. I think that, YouTube, like I said, is not so much for interview. I think that YouTube also, there's 1 million podcasts versus 30 million YouTube channels. I think YouTube has tremendous potential. And I'm actually, as we speak, investing more time in YouTube. But a podcast to me is just a no-brainer way to get to know your influencers in your industry. You can interview customers, you can interview employees. I think, what I'm finding as I'm writing this new book, similar to how I had all these, eye-opening moments with influencer marketing, is that digital marketing really comes down to relationships, in whether it's, SEO or email or social or all of this. And podcasting is one of the most effective ways It's a little bit of investment of time, but it really is an effective way to help you build those relationships. And that is golden.
And what advice would you have then for businesses that are just starting out, in the post-COVID economy? And how do they go about like choosing A, influencers, and B, the best SEO strategy? Like is there a particular platform that you'd like to recommend for where one can get influencers, or do you just want to stick to what you said earlier that we should start with people we know already instead of looking for people we don't know?
Yeah, are you talking about influencers vis-a-vis
Yes,
people to reach out
influencers.
to
Yeah.
for your podcast?
Hmm.
Okay.
Well, influencer on the one hand, influencer marketing in general, but also on the other hand, well, you already explained podcast, so let's just do the influencer bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think, and it really obviously depends on the industry and what have you. Um, the whole reason why I talk about this notion of like influencer marketing with people that have brand affinity is that the influencer marketing industry over time has widened the pie in terms of the definition of who is an influencer. So, it is a money-driven industry, obviously. And when you only have a few influencers, there's not enough supply, right? And prices are really high. So that's when you begin with the celebrities and then you work your way down to like macro influencers. And then at some point they called them micro influencers. I don't think there's anything micro about them, but maybe they had like 50 to 500,000 followers. And over time, and I know people that work at some of these influencer marketing technology platforms, they would lower that to like 10,000, right? So as demand increases and as prices go up, they need to increase supply. And then what happened was, I think this happened over the last year or two, is this notion of a nano influencer. And hey, even people with 1,000 followers have value. So now you have the nano influencer, and obviously there's no one definition here, but like 1 to 10,000 followers, let's say. And the reason is that, and I know of people that have literally, they're photographers, they want to sign up to an influencer platform. They need to have a minimum 10,000 followers. What do? They bought 8,500 followers. They signed up, they got deals, right? I think that as the industry matures, and I'm finally starting to see it. I don't know why companies didn't do this before. They're finally starting to ask as they vet influencers, are you a user of our product? Have you ever used our product?
Mm.
Because, we talk about this need for authenticity. I think COVID really brought this home that we crave what is real. And when we think about all those new stars on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, they're real. I think a few years ago it was sort of like this ideal influencer look, which today is just not the same. And if brands want to do well working with influencers, why wouldn't you work with someone that already knows, likes, and trusts you, that already is a user of your product? When you work with someone that isn't, it comes across in the content, right? It's not as authentic. It's probably not going to be as good as someone, even though they have less followers. And here's the thing, people with less followers, there's also less chance of fraud. There's less chance that they bought the followers. There's less chance they're buying engagement because they never played the game to begin with, right? And you begin now, this is sort of another thing that's another trend that's happened since I published the book, is you begin to look at influencers not just for content amplification, but for actual content creation. And I
Mm.
noticed this when I mentioned that first company that I work with as an agency. So many years ago, the first influencer marketing campaign that I helped with was for mommy bloggers. And I found that the creatives they were creating, the images they were creating, far, far exceeded what this company's own department was creating in terms of imagery, right? So you begin to tap into influencers for their creative skills, for photo, for video, for writing. And you may not even need that amplification. I mean, the amplification may come, but even just leveraging their content for your ads, for your organic social media, for UGC, in your shopping cart, on your website. I mean, all the data shows that this sort of user generated content, and imagine when it comes from your customers, right? That content just performs well everywhere across marketing. So now instead of paying influencers to post something for us, why don't we pay our fans to help create content for us? And that's been a shift that we've seen over the last year. And we've seen a shift of more and more brands saying, I don't want to use influencer marketplaces. I want to create my own army of influencers internal from my customer base. And let's reach out to people that have 1,000 followers, 2,000 followers. So I begin, and that's why, with more and more confidence, because there's just more and more nano influencers out there. There's more of us, and with every generation that's more active in social, they have more and more followers. So that's where I begin. Your followers, your customers. If you are an e-commerce company and if you're on Shopify, there are tools like Get Caro or Get CARRO.com, which literally they integrate with your Instagram. They'll pull in your Instagram followers, they'll pull in your email database, they'll pull in your Shopify shopping cart history, and they will expose to you the influencers that already know, like, and trust you. And with this hair color company that I work with, when we use their tool, we found there were verified Instagram influencers with 6-figure followers that were already their customers, right? But we never knew that, and therefore we never began a conversation with them to see where that might go. So when you tap into people that already know you, that's the value. You don't need to sell them, right? And you begin to build this deeper relationship because they know you and they use your product. You might get really invaluable feedback, right? They might be able to help you with your social media. I mean, there's so many benefits that companies can have above and beyond just, hey, here's a $50 Amazon gift card. Please, take this picture and promote it. So I absolutely would start with that. Followers, customers, partners, distributors, employees. I think that's where I'd start. And if you exhaust that, sure. Or if you're a startup, you don't have that, you need to somehow incite word of mouth. And the best way to do this is by gifting product. Reach out to people. I have, marketing tools companies reach out to me all the time, right? Hey, love it if you try our tool. We'll give you a free month or, whatever it is. Very similar to B2C companies saying, hey, we'll send you this free handbag if you give it a shot, and give us your feedback. And if you love it, we'd love if you post it on social media. It's a similar thing. So, some of this does depend on where you are on your business journey, how big you are, how many customers you have. But I would always start with people that know you, because when you start with people that you've never heard of and they've never heard of you, it tends to be expensive. The content tends not to be as effective. And it turns out to be a one-night stand. And the ROI of influencer marketing is the long-term relationship, is people talking about you and posting content about you when you don't ask them to do it, because you've already converted them into becoming a brand ambassador. So instead of trying to convert influencers into becoming brand ambassadors, start with your own internal, people that like, know, and trust your brand, and convert them into brand ambassadors and start there.
That's definitely a fresh perspective into looking at the whole influencer marketing game. So the last question is, so what is your next book going to be about? Is it going to be about meme marketing? Because you mentioned that's what you think is an upcoming marketing trend.
Yeah, well, I think that, and this is from a podcast interview that I recently did, where I realized that I thought, meme marketing was a very, very narrow type of marketing. But I think, and maybe instead of meme marketing, I should have said like remix culture or remix marketing. It's this notion of having something that people are playing upon, responding to through content. You see this on TikTok, obviously, with certain songs and certain dances, and people work off that. And that is, maybe it's a generation thing, but that's huge. But what I'm looking at, though, is this notion of, this concept of influencer marketing being all about relationships. Well, when I look at SEO, I look at relationships as well. I look at relationships with Google, as well as relationships with other websites in terms of backlinking, in terms of obviously relationships with your audience, in terms of the content. When I look at email marketing, I look at relationships. I look at it. You need to build relationships with people. If it's just automated email, when you ask questions, when you ask for engagement in those emails, you begin to develop those relationships. And obviously social media is sort of the same way. So, for me, the pandemic has had a lot of companies reach out to me, and they're basically trying to accelerate their digital transformation, accelerate the things they should have been doing, but they didn't. So for me, it's really this digital first mindset. If we are to think truly digital first about our marketing, what should it look like? And it begins with that. And then it begins with the fact that, well, okay, if you want to be found digitally, or if you want to develop relationships with people digitally, there's only 3 main ways to do that. It's either search or email or social. And when I say search, it includes sort of like podcasts, it includes YouTube's in terms of digital discoverability. But to me, yeah, social is still critical, but that search and email are equally critical today. And I think that these old school things a lot of companies take for granted that continue to generate high ROI, it's time to really mix them together and really create this comprehensive look. And that's where I am. I'm currently I'm about to release this free like 5,000 word sort of preview of what that book is going to be about. But that's sort of the direction that I'm looking at going, just really sticking to If it ain't search, it ain't social, it ain't email, what are you going to do? And therefore, if it is, how can you really maximize your opportunities and really, rethink what you can do within each of those spheres in 2021, 2022, not in 2010 or 2015.
I'm definitely looking forward to that preview and the book when it comes out. But yeah, that was the last question. And thanks everyone for joining us for this month's episode of Outgrow's Market of the Month. That was Neal Schaffer, who is the author of The Age of Influence and the host of the Maximize Your Social Influence podcast. Thanks for joining us, Neal.
Oh, thank you so much. It was an honor.
Do check out their website for more details. And we'll see you once again next month with another Marketer of the Month.